The young dreamer mechanic. The beginning of the story of Honda takes place in a rural Japan still marked by a slow pace of life, where dusty roads connect small villages and traditional trades remain at the center of daily activity. On the 17th of November of 1906, in one of those localities, Soichiro Honda is born and grows up, a child who spends his early years surrounded by the sound of metal being struck in the forge, the smell of oil that soaks every tool in the family workshop, and the constant presence of bicycles that arrive battered and leave renewed thanks to the hands of his father, an artisan who combines the skill of a blacksmith with the patience of a meticulous repairman. In that environment, where each spinning wheel and each tightened screw tell a small story, young Soichiro unknowingly absorbs a way of understanding the world based on observation, practice, and mechanical intuition that would later define his entire life. Before continuing, I am very curious to know from which place in the world and at what time you joined this night. I would love to read you in the comments and learn about the diversity of people who share this space while listening to stories that blend entrepreneurship, rest, and inspiration. It is a small gesture, but it helps build a community that travels together through tales like this one. Returning to that first environment, the family workshop functions as a world of its own for Soichiro, a place where machines seem to have personality and where each client brings a different challenge. While other children run through the fields or play in the street, he prefers to watch how his father heats iron until it becomes malleable, or how he disassembles a worn-out wheel and reassembles it with almost ritual movements. Those everyday scenes awaken in him a fascination that grows with the passing of years, an almost physical need to understand how things work. That restlessness leads him to experiment. From a very young age, he takes pieces apart without permission, inspects mechanisms without yet knowing how to put them back together, and leans as far as he can over the edge of the forge to see how temperature transforms materials. The mixture of noise, smell, and movement creates an environment that keeps him hypnotized, as if each day were an invitation to discover something new about the functioning of machines. School, on the other hand, never manages to captivate him. The lessons do not hold his attention, and the repetitive exercises feel distant compared to the excitement of handling real objects, touching gears, and learning through direct experimentation. Although this causes some concern in his family, what truly defines those years is his enormous determination to learn in his own way, following a curiosity that does not understand schedules or mandatory subjects. Instead of copying sentences into a notebook, he prefers to walk through the workshop watching how adults solve concrete problems, from a jammed chain to a deformation in a bicycle frame, and each detail becomes a stimulus that fuels his ingenuity. One day, his life changes unexpectedly when he witnesses something that in that moment is little less than a rarity in his region. In the midst of the usual silence of the village, an automobile appears. It is a simple and noisy vehicle, but for young Soichiro, it represents a dazzling vision, an object that seems taken from another world. The impact is so intense that he decides to follow it, running behind the engine that spits smoke and moves slowly along a bumpy road. That encounter awakens a feeling difficult to describe, a mixture of admiration, surprise, and a desire to understand what mysteries are hidden inside a machine capable of moving without pedals, without horses, and with a force that seems to come from some magical place. From that moment on, his imagination becomes marked by the idea that motorized vehicles are the future, and he promises himself that someday he will be as close to them as possible, even if to achieve it he must leave his comfort behind and venture into unknown territory. That new obsession adds to his natural inclination for manual work and begins to shape his character. Each day spent in the family workshop feeds his desire to learn about engines, even though he still has no access to any. When he allows himself to dream quietly, he imagines what it would be like to build a machine that could travel those long roads connecting villages and cities. And although he does not have the knowledge or the tools, he does possess an extraordinary will that is reflected even in his childhood games. While most boys his age entertain themselves with simple activities, he prefers to build small contraptions with any material he finds. pieces of wood, bits of metal, loose spokes, old gears. He does not always manage to make them work, but each attempt makes him feel a little closer to the world he wishes to understand. As he grows, that inner energy takes the form of a decision to leave the village and look for a place where he can learn more, where he can get closer to the real engines that obsess him so much. That kind of determination, so uncommon in a teenager of the time, reveals the strength that will accompany him throughout his life. In the family workshop, there is no longer enough to discover for a young man who dreams of machines much larger and more complex than the bicycles his father repairs. And although the farewell is not easy, Soichiro has the feeling that the path he wishes to follow requires movement, requires progress, and requires the courage to leave comfort behind in order to pursue a knowledge that calls to him insistently. With this mixture of curiosity, need for learning, and an almost visceral impulse to approach advanced mechanics, young Honda begins to prepare for his next great stage, the one in which the family workshop will be left behind and he will face the real world of automotive workshops in the city, a completely different environment that will allow him to discover to what extent he is willing to follow his vocation. And with this vital change on the horizon, we naturally approach the next chapter, where we will begin to see how those early dreams start to take shape on a more demanding and challenging path. First, inventions and stumbles. When Soichiro Honda leaves behind the peace of his hometown to head toward the city, he does so with a determination that is surprising for his age, because even as an adolescent, he understands that his future is not in observing engines from afar, but in living among them, breathing the smell of fresh gasoline, and feeling how the vibration of a well-tuned machine travels through the ground. His first destination is a modest workshop that accepts young apprentices, a place where the days stretch without anyone complaining, and where mistakes are not discussed in a classroom, but corrected among metallic blows, dirty hands, and the voices of mechanics who have devoted their lives to hard work. For Soichiro, that environment is so stimulating that it does not take long for it to become something like an alternative home, a place where he can truly learn what he had dreamed of understanding since he was a child. The beginnings, however, are far from easy. Most of the tasks assigned to him are routine and demanding, actions that any apprentice must master before touching more complex parts, cleaning tools, organizing nuts by size, carrying components that weigh more than he does, and enduring the jokes and scoldings of the veterans who want to make sure that he has the discipline necessary to survive in a demanding workshop. The toughness of the place strengthens his character, because although each day leaves him exhausted, he never gives up or loses his interest in discovering how every piece that passes through his hands works. He observes with unusual concentration, memorizes the sound an engine makes when something is not properly adjusted, and even tries to guess the failures before the mechanics explain them to him, something that begins to draw the attention of those who supervise him. With time, the workshop managers notice that his hands move with an ease that is not common in someone so young. The intuitive learning he, absorbed since childhood, begins to emerge in a more mature way, so that when they allow him to accompany the experienced mechanics in a more complex repair, he demonstrates a surprising ability to understand what is happening under the hood of an automobile. The city is full of vehicles that arrive damaged from dirt roads or from endless travels, and in each of them he finds an opportunity to learn something new. There he understands that an engine is a living organism composed of pieces that depend on one another, and that any adjustment, even the smallest one, has consequences on overall performance. That almost instinctive understanding becomes his personal signature. During this stage, a growing taste for speed also awakens in him. By working with automobiles of different types, he hears stories about local competitions, improvised races, and challenges among mechanics who want to prove who truly knows how to extract the full power of an engine. That mix of technique and risk draws him strongly. As soon as he has the opportunity, he begins to get involved in that world, first as a helper in preparing vehicles, and then as a participant in small events, where he discovers the adrenaline produced by speed when the engine responds exactly as he expects. The roar of the vehicle, The trembling of the steering wheel, the wind crossing the cabin, and the feeling of being at the limit of his abilities allow him to understand better what an automobile needs to perform at its best, because it is not only about pure mechanics, but about sensitivity to interpret how the machine behaves under pressure. In one of those races, he suffers a considerable accident. The vehicle loses stability and ends up overturned outside the improvised circuit. Soichiro is injured, although not seriously, and that incident could have extinguished his enthusiasm, but the opposite happens. The impact intensifies his desire to perfect mechanics so that a vehicle responds more predictably in extreme conditions. Instead of feeling fear, he analyzes what happened with admirable meticulousness for someone so young, reviews every piece involved, and reaches conclusions that push him to experiment in the workshop during long nights when his companions have already left. There he modifies components, tests combinations of materials, and repeats adjustments again and again, guided by a mix of curiosity and ambition that is rarely seen in an apprentice. As that passion grows, so does his desire for independence. He begins to receive more important jobs, and more clients specifically request that he be the one to examine their vehicle. His veteran companions, who at first treated him with a mix of indifference and friendly teasing, begin to recognize his talent. They see that he is willing to work more than anyone else, that he understands mechanics through intuition and direct experience, and that he possesses a technical imagination that allows him to see solutions where others only see problems. That attitude makes him a valuable apprentice, although also someone difficult to stop when he sets his mind on something. One day, without warning, the need to create on his own arises in him, to invent beyond the tasks assigned to him. He begins to design small tools, modifies existing equipment, and manufactures experimental parts that, although not always successful, show a level of creativity far above the usual. Many of those early inventions do not go beyond failed attempts, but they make clear that he is not an ordinary mechanic. It is no longer enough for him to repair or improve the vehicles of others. He wants to build new solutions, something that responds to his vision of how a machine should work. That creative restlessness becomes the seed of what later would be his own business approach. Of all the learning he gains in this stage, perhaps the most significant is the understanding that technical excellence arises from constant work, prolonged trial, and the ability to observe in detail even the most subtle variations in the behavior of an engine. This period of his life functions as a profound school where each day offers a different lesson and where the pressure of the urban environment forces him to be faster, more precise, and more ingenious. That mix of discipline and creativity will be the foundation that supports his professional future. As his reputation grows, the need to take a further step also arises, to seek a path of his own that does not depend on anyone's orders. He then begins to consider the idea of building something that represents his vision, something that is not a simple repair, but a complete product conceived from the ground up. That restlessness becomes so strong that little by little it begins to transform his way of working and understanding his trade, preparing the ground for the next stage of his life, where ambition and creativity will become forces much more powerful than any tool in the workshop. With these firm foundations and a confidence that grows with each challenge overcome, he is ready to enter a phase where his ideas will transform into projects of greater scale, marking the first great turning point on his path. The great bed of the piston, the life of Soichiro Honda, enters a new phase when his restlessness no longer fits within the limits of someone else's workshop and begins to transform into a much larger ambition, to create something of his own, something that does not depend on the decisions of others, something that carries his way of understanding mechanics to an industrial scale. Japan is changing, the automobile industry is growing, and factories are beginning to need specialized parts capable of withstanding ever greater stresses. In that context, a seemingly small piece appears, but one absolutely crucial to the heart of any engine, the piston ring. Soichiro, who has spent years listening to every strange noise and analyzing every abnormal vibration, understands that engine performance is also decided in those invisible details that almost no one looks at, but that determine whether combustion is efficient or energy is wasted through leaks and excessive friction. With that intuition leading him and a confidence he has built blow by blow, he decides to found his own company, Tokai Seiki, with a clear focus to manufacture high-precision piston rings for automobile manufacturers. It is not merely a matter of setting up a small factory, but of taking a mental leap, moving from the world of the repair shop to the universe of industrial suppliers, where tolerances are measured in thousandths and errors are paid for with lost contracts. What drives him is the intimate conviction that he can perfect that part better than many others, because he comes from the field, because he knows the engine from the inside of a workshop and not from an office. With few resources and a lot of enthusiasm, he begins to build his small company, surrounding himself with workers who will have to learn with him a trade that is new for them all. The technical challenge is enormous from the start. A piston ring looks like a simple metal hoop, but in reality it is an element that must withstand high temperatures, extreme pressures, and constant friction, maintaining an almost perfect seal inside the cylinder. If the ring is too rigid, it breaks. If it is too soft, it loses its shape. If it does not fit well, the engine consumes excessive oil or loses compression. Soichiro faces this problem in his characteristic style. He tests, he makes mistakes, he tests again, and he turns the factory into an improvised laboratory where every failure is recorded in his memory as another lesson. The first pieces that leave Tokai Seiki are far from reaching the quality he imagines, but instead of becoming discouraged, he delves into the details, studies new materials, modifies the casting and machining processes, and invents tools that allow him to increase precision. At that moment, one of his most ambitious goals is to become a supplier to Toyota, a company that is emerging strongly in the Japanese automotive sector. Getting a company of that size to trust a small factory like his would be like suddenly opening a gigantic door to the future, because it would give him economic stability, industrial legitimacy, and a volume of work capable of propelling Tokai Seiki to another level. With that goal in mind, he prepares samples of his piston rings and presents them with hope, trusting that his technical dedication will be evident in every piece. Reality hits hard. When Toyota evaluates the rings, the diagnosis is clear and harsh. The pieces do not meet the necessary quality standards. There are problems with fit, with strength, with consistency from one unit to another. For any entrepreneur, this kind of rejection could be devastating, and even more so when it comes from a key customer who could determine the survival of the company. But in Soichiro's way of thinking, failure is not a final sentence, but an accurate indicator of what must be improved. Far from giving up, he interprets that refusal as a failed exam that he can retake, and instead of withdrawing to lick his wounds, he returns to the factory determined to review every step of the manufacturing process with a more critical eye. For a long period, the factory becomes a place of constant experimentation. New metal alloys are tested, furnace temperatures are adjusted, molds are modified, and machines are refined, always with the intention of minimizing the differences between the pieces produced. Soichiro's perfectionism borders on obsessive. He measures, he weighs, he compares and repeats until the margins of error are compressed to levels that once seemed unattainable. It is not only about improving the product, it is about transforming a small artisanal factory into a disciplined system capable of reproducing quality again and again in series. Through this process, without realizing it, he is developing a work culture that later will be one of the keys to Honda's growth. The idea that every defect is an opportunity to perfect both the product and the method. Finally, that consistency begins to bear fruit. When Tokai Seiki presents its piston rings to Toyota again, the quality has changed enough for the perception of the company to change as well. This time, the engineers who review the pieces find a precision that approaches what they need, a consistency that indicates the production process is under control, and a level of commitment that is evident in the finish of each ring. The initial rejection transforms, step by step, into acceptance, and the small factory founded by that passionate mechanic becomes a supplier to a company that is destined to occupy an important place in the automotive industry. Beyond the contract itself, what this stage engraves in the history of Honda is a profound business lesson. Large agreements are not achieved with speeches. They are won by meeting standards that sometimes seem unattainable, and to reach that point, one must accept external criticism as an instrument of improvement. The young entrepreneur understands that a customer's trust is not bought, it is earned with every delivery, and that behind every part placed in an engine there is a chain of technical and human decisions that must be aligned with a very clear idea of quality. That mentality will be the foundation on which he will build his future projects, because from this point on, no ambitious goal will seem completely impossible, provided he is willing to pay the price of sustained effort. The period in which Tokai Seiki grows also coincides with a delicate historical moment for Japan, which is gradually entering a wartime context that will require industry to adapt to new demands and pressures. Soichiro's company is swept along by that environment, manufacturing parts for applications increasingly linked to the military effort, and economic and social tension is noticeable in the daily life of the factory. Even so, amid that complex atmosphere, the technical and productive capacity he has developed allows him to remain standing. Although the decisions made at political and military levels lie completely outside the control of a simple piston ring manufacturer. This stage, full of technical advances, hard-to-obtain contracts and external pressures, leaves Soichiro with a very clear certainty. He has proven that he can build a company from nothing. He has shown that he can meet demands that at first seemed beyond his reach, and he has experienced firsthand that perseverance applied intelligently can open doors that at first closed abruptly. However, he is also about to discover that no matter how solid a business may seem, the forces of the environment can bring it down in an instant, and that true entrepreneurial spirit reveals itself when everything built is put at risk. With that mixture of technical achievements and shadows beginning to appear on the horizon, Honda's story moves toward a period of profound shocks, where destruction and the ability to start anew will play a decisive role. War, destruction, and rebirth. When the piston ring factory begins to operate with a certain level of stability, and the orders from Toyota give Tokai Seiki a solid foundation from which to grow, the historical environment starts to become clouded in a way that no entrepreneur can control. Japan is gradually heading toward an economy oriented toward conflict. International tension increases, and little by little, the workshops, factories, and small companies are pushed to shift their activity according to military needs. For Soichiro Honda, that means that his piston rings are no longer destined only for civil automobiles, but for engines of vehicles that will take part in a war that feels increasingly close. Even though in the day-to-day life of the factory, the work continues to be the same: melting, machining, polishing, and inspecting parts with extremely high demands. The pace of production accelerates, the workdays lengthen, the pressure to fulfill orders becomes constant, and Tokai Seiki grows in size and responsibility to the point of building new facilities and providing work to hundreds of people. For a man who began as a workshop apprentice, seeing that structure rise from his own initiative has something incredible about it. And in the midst of the harshness of the context, there is still room for a certain silent satisfaction for what has been achieved. However, the atmosphere in the country becomes more tense, resources become scarce, restrictions appear, and daily life fills with signs that the war is consuming every corner of society, from food to fuel. As the air raids over Japan intensify, factories become obvious targets. Tokai Seiki, as a key supplier of engine components, is no exception. During one of those incursions, the bombings hit its facilities and reduced to ruins an important part of the plants that had required so many years and sacrifices to build. The fire spreads with devastating speed, the structures collapse, the machines become useless, and in a matter of hours a large part of that industrial pride that Soichiro had built with such effort disappears. Where there had once been the noise of production, the smell of metal, and incessant movement, there is now only smoke, ashes, and silence. Far from being the end of his problems, nature adds its own blow. Sometime later, an earthquake finishes what the war had not yet destroyed, damaging the remaining facilities and making it clear that Tokai Seiki, as it had been conceived, will hardly be able to continue. It is a kind of double sentence. The human attack and the force of the earth combine to test how much an entrepreneur can withstand when the environment decides to sweep away everything visible. For anyone, this combination of disasters would have meant a logical surrender, a moment to say, "This is as far as I can go." For Soichiro, however, the thought goes in another direction. He would later say that when he saw the remains of the factory, he felt a strange kind of relief. A sense that the cycle of that company had closed in a violent, yes, but definitive way, and that his creative energy should be directed toward a new project. This way of processing catastrophe says a lot about his character. Instead of becoming trapped in nostalgia for what was lost, he looks toward what can still be built. And that leads him to make a decision as pragmatic as it is courageous. He decides to sell what is left of Tokai Seiki to Toyota, not as a depressing liquidation, but as a way of transforming ruins into capital, handing over the company in exchange for shares that would have value in the future. This operation is a revealing gesture from a business perspective. It shows a founder who understands that sentimental attachment to a company can become a burden when circumstances have changed in an irreversible way, and that sometimes the best way to honor what has been built is to accept that its stage has ended and to use what can still be salvaged to begin something new. Where another person would see only loss, he identifies an opportunity to free himself from a structure that has been damaged and to recover room to maneuver and think again from zero. It is a way of being reborn, even before having a clear idea of where that new drive will be directed. While the entire country struggles with the devastation of the war, Soichiro finds himself in a strange position. He has gone from directing an important company to apparently being left with nothing tangible except his technical experience, his knowledge of industrial quality, and a character that has been tempered by every blow reality has given him. This combination, however, is more valuable than it seems, because it places him in a position where he can allow himself to look at the world with renewed curiosity. Without concrete chains tying him to a type of product or a type of client, he has already shown that he can build a factory from zero and withstand extreme demands. Now the challenge will be finding a new starting point once again. In post-war Japan, the situation is extremely harsh. The cities are damaged, the economy is exhausted, there is a shortage of fuel and basic resources, and many people can only think about surviving until the next day. However, even in such an environment, new needs appear that call for imaginative solutions. People have to move, go to work, transport goods, visit their families, and what little remains of the transportation infrastructure is not enough to meet that demand. In the midst of that reality, opportunities appear for those who are capable of seeing beyond immediate misery and detecting patterns of behavior, gaps in the market, problems that are waiting for someone willing to take risks again. Soichiro, now free from the weight of Tokai Seiki, begins to observe those needs with the same eye with which, as a child, he looked at the spokes of a bicycle or followed an automobile along the dusty road of his village. The war has emptied him of factories, but it has not emptied him of creativity, and his way of looking at the world continues to be that of a mechanic with the soul of an inventor. He knows that the country needs practical solutions, affordable vehicles that consume little, and that can adapt to a context where gasoline is a scarce good, and pockets are far from being able to afford large automobiles. This stage of destruction and inner rebirth profoundly shapes his vision of entrepreneurship. He learns that no company, no matter how strong it seems, is safe from the blows of the environment, and that the true value of a founder resides not only in the company he directs, but in the ability to begin again when everything has fallen apart. That mentality will allow him, in the following years, to think with freedom, and to dare to pursue ideas that others would consider too risky in such a fragile scenario. As Japan slowly begins to rebuild itself among the debris, Soichiro Honda finds himself ready to listen to the needs of the people and to transform something as dramatic as the lack of resources into fertile ground for innovation. The path that will lead him from this emptiness to his great post-war discovery begins to take shape in these days of uncertainty, in which every mobility problem becomes a reminder that he still has much to invent and that his story as a creator is far from over. The miraculous bicycle with a motor. When the war ends and Japan begins to rebuild itself among ruins, daily life becomes a continuous challenge, a permanent test of ingenuity and survival. The cities show deep scars, resources are scarce, and transportation becomes a serious problem because while the country tries to reconstruct itself, most people walk every day long distances to reach work or access the few services that are still standing. Automobiles are scarce, expensive, and difficult to maintain due to the lack of fuel. Bicycles, although abundant, are not enough to face long journeys while carrying tools, goods, or simply the accumulated fatigue of a nation trying to get back on its feet. In that very particular scenario, full of shortcomings, a spark appears that will change the industrial history of Japan. The idea of transforming a common bicycle into a vehicle capable of easing the weight of daily life. After selling what remained of Tokai Seiki, Soichiro Honda finds himself in an ambiguous situation. He no longer has a factory, but he does have an enormous amount of experience, an innate talent for mechanics, and a highly developed intuition for detecting problems that can become business opportunities. As he watches people going back and forth with effort, as he listens to the constant murmur of a country trying to move forward despite its wounds, he begins to wonder what kind of solution could offer immediate relief. Something that would be cheap, durable, accessible, and capable of functioning even in a context where fuel is almost a luxury. That search for answers leads him to an unexpected discovery. Among the military leftovers accumulated after the war, the Japanese government auctions thousands of small auxiliary engines that were originally intended to power portable army radios. They are tiny engines, simple, rough, not designed for transportation, but extremely cheap and available in large quantities. When Soichiro sees them, he understands something that others are not seeing. Those modest mechanisms can become the heart of a new type of vehicle. Something improvised, yes, but also useful and capable of changing the lives of many people. Where others see a military scrap with no use, he detects a starting point. With that characteristic instinct that has guided his most important decisions, he buys as many engines as he can. He does not have a completely defined plan, but he does have a deeply clear idea: to adapt them to common bicycles, to create a kind of hybrid between bicycle and motorcycle. That concept, which at first may seem almost experimental, responds directly to the needs of the moment. Japan is not in a position for sophisticated vehicles, but it is ready for inventions that optimize human effort with the least possible consumption of gasoline. The first attempts are clumsy, improvised, and full of difficulties. The military engines were not designed to move people. They have excessive vibrations. Their mounts do not fit well with bicycle frames, and their carburation requires a complete adaptation. Soichiro, however, turns each stumble into an opportunity for learning. He works for hours adjusting supports, reinforcing structures, modifying the engine's fuel intake, and performing tests that leave him covered in smoke, oil, and dust, but also filled with a renewed energy he had not felt for a long time. Unlike the complex piston rings, this new project has an element of immediacy that connects him directly with the needs of the people around him. When he finally manages to assemble a functional prototype, the result is surprising. The bicycle moves smoothly, the engine pushes enough to reduce the effort of pedaling, and the sense of freedom it offers is new for those who, for years, have had only their own legs as propulsion. The neighbors, seeing him ride through the streets, feel curious. Some laugh incredulously, others show genuine interest. It does not take long before he receives requests. first from friends and acquaintances, then from people he had never seen before. Each new motorized bicycle opens more doors, because word begins to spread that there is an invention capable of saving energy, easing exhausting journeys and multiplying speed without requiring significant fuel consumption. That immediate social impact pushes him to take a bigger step. He gathers a small group of collaborators, almost all people who, like him, are looking for opportunities in the devastated post-war economy, and sets up a first workshop dedicated exclusively to adapting engines to bicycles. The structure is humble, but the energy felt there is contagious, because everyone senses that they are participating in something that can have a real effect on the life of the community. Production is small at first, limited by the availability of components and by the fragility of the process itself. But each bicycle that leaves the workshop becomes a small ambassador of Japanese ingenuity in difficult times. As he advances, Soichiro begins to perfect every detail. He improves the supports to avoid excessive vibrations, designs new fuel tanks to adapt them to the bicycle frame, modifies the air intake to optimize the mixture, and ensures that even the least experienced users can maintain the vehicle with basic tools. The success of the invention does not lie only in the initial creativity, but in the ability to refine it until turning it into a reliable, stable product suitable for daily use. That spirit of constant improvement, which in the future will become one of Honda's identity traits, is already forming in this early stage. The demand grows so quickly that the small workshop becomes insufficient. Soichiro realizes that the invention is no longer an improvised solution for a temporary crisis, but the starting point for a bigger and more articulated industrial vision. He begins to imagine a future in which he can manufacture his own engines, develop more sophisticated designs, produce in larger volumes, and create a vehicle that does not depend on adaptations but instead is born from scratch with its own identity. That desire to move forward, to transform a functional idea into a solid industrial project, is a clear sign that his entrepreneurial spirit has returned with renewed strength. The invention of the bicycle with a motor also carries another important message. It demonstrates that innovation does not always come from large laboratories, enormous investments, or advanced technologies. Sometimes it is born from observing an urgent need, from working with what is at hand, and from applying creativity to turn scarcity into opportunity. For a country trying to rise from the rubble, these ideas hold immense inspiring power. Users of these motorized bicycles can travel farther, carry more load, work with less exhaustion, and feel that the future still offers possible paths. From this invention onward, Soichiro's business logic changes forever. He no longer thinks only in technical solutions, but in complete products that improve the lives of millions of people. He begins to understand the enormous potential of designing light vehicles that combine low consumption, accessibility, and reliability, elements that will form the backbone of his future developments. This first post-war success is not a simple improvised product. It is the prologue to the birth of a company that will transform global mobility. And while this small recycled military engine pushes the first modified bicycles through the streets of a reborn Japan, Soichiro clearly feels that what he is building can take a larger and more defined shape, something that goes beyond survival and that is destined to become a true company with a name, identity, and vision for the future. That intuition begins to gain strength, preparing the way for a new chapter in his entrepreneurial life. Honda motor takes shape. The success of those bicycles with improvised motors made from small military engines marks a before and after in the life of Soichiro Honda, because it proves that his intuition remains sharp, that he is capable of reading the needs of a wounded country and transforming them into something useful, and at the same time it makes clear to him that, if he wants to go further, he must leave behind the logic of adaptation and enter a stage in which everything is born, designed from zero, under his command. The motorized bicycles have given him visibility, they have given him customers, and they have returned to him the feeling of building a future. But in his mind, a bigger idea is already taking shape, creating a company dedicated to manufacturing engines and light vehicles with its own identity, with its own technology, and with a philosophy much more ambitious than simple post-war survival. It is, in this context, at the end of the decade of the 1940s, when an encounter takes place that will change forever the course of his project. Soichiro is a mechanical genius, a man of workshop, intuition, and risk. But he lacks something that is just as important when one intends to scale a company: a strategic mind capable of organizing numbers, designing commercial structures, outlining expansion plans, and maintaining economic stability in the middle of a delicate environment. That missing piece of the puzzle arrives in the figure of Takeo Fujisawa, a reserved but very perceptive man with a special sensitivity for business and a colder and more calculated vision than that of the impulsive Honda. When they meet, they immediately realize that they speak different languages within the same dream, and that this difference can be a huge advantage if they learn to combine their talents. The alliance that arises between them is one of the most interesting in the history of Japanese entrepreneurship. Soichiro focuses on engineering, on technical development, on prototypes, on the relentless improvement of engines, chassis, and systems. Fujisawa takes charge of finances, of sales, of the relationship with distributors, of territorial expansion, and of any decision related to economic stability and orderly growth. Both agree on a kind of tacit division in which each one respects the other's territory. Soichiro can make technical decisions even if they seem risky, as long as Fujisawa can evaluate their commercial impact. Fujisawa can say no to certain expansions if he believes the moment is not right, even though the founder feels the urgency to advance. Between the two of them, they create a balance that, although at times generates intense discussions, becomes essential so that the company does not overflow. In 1948, Honda Motor Company is formally established, and with that gesture the stage of improvisation closes definitively to open another of conscious construction. At the beginning, the company remains closely linked to the concept of an auxiliary motor for bicycles because it is the product that is generating immediate income. But in Soichiro's mind, ideas are already circulating for developing more robust machines, with their own chassis, that do not depend on an adapted bicycle frame, but are born as complete vehicles designed to meet multiple needs. In the Honda workshops, sketches, models, and small prototypes begin to appear, exploring different designs of light motorcycles, while the company organizes itself to receive orders, manage inventories, and create a distribution network that goes beyond the immediate neighborhood. Meanwhile, Fujisawa places special emphasis on something many entrepreneurs underestimate: the construction of a clear internal culture. He understands that it is not enough to have good products. A team aligned with a way of working, an ethic, and a shared ambition is needed. So, while Soichiro obsesses the engineers with the precision of a connecting rod or the efficiency of a carburetor, Takeo ensures that the employees understand where the company is headed, why certain decisions are made, and what role each person plays along that path. A unique identity begins to form, one that combines discipline, technical curiosity, and a kind of quiet pride in doing things well, even when no one is watching. In that first phase, Honda Motor is still small compared to other companies that managed to survive the war. But there is something different in the energy that can be felt there. The company does not limit itself to following trends, it wants to set them. Soichiro insists that every product bearing the Honda name must offer something special, whether in efficiency, durability, ease of maintenance, or performance. He repeats over and over that the important thing is not to manufacture on a massive scale just for the sake of manufacturing, but to earn the trust of whoever buys, so that each customer becomes a kind of ambassador for the brand. That insistence on trust, although it may seem abstract, translates into very concrete decisions: exhaustive engine tests, safety reviews, component checks that other manufacturers would overlook, and frank communication with distributors about the strengths and weaknesses of each model. The company begins to launch its first complete motorcycles, such as the models that evolve from the auxiliary motor until they become true motorized vehicles, with their own frame and more advanced features. These early machines are not yet global icons, but they play an important role. They allow Honda to learn to design, produce, and sell complete vehicles at an increasing scale. Each model that reaches the market becomes an experiment, one more step in the search for the ideal formula between power, consumption, cost, and reliability. Meanwhile, the Japanese economic environment slowly stabilizes, and the working class begins to have a little more margin to invest in means of transportation that save time and effort. Fujisawa, for his part, is clear that the Japanese market, although enormous, will not be enough for the ambition that is beginning to awaken in them. In long conversations, both reflect on the future possibility of going abroad, of taking Honda products to other countries, of demonstrating that from a rebuilt Japan an industry capable of competing with foreign giants can emerge. These ideas still seem distant, but the simple act of considering them influences the way they think about each decision. It is not only about manufacturing for the neighbor, it is about creating standards that can stand anywhere in the world. In the middle of all this process, the impulsive character of Soichiro and the cautious mind of Fujisawa clash more than once. There are discussions about how much to risk in a new product line, about the speed with which they should invest in machinery, about whether or not to accept certain orders that could saturate the factory's capacity. However, despite the tensions, the relationship remains firm because both feel that the other provides exactly what each one lacks. Soichiro recognizes in Fujisawa a financial compass that prevents his technical passion from ending in disaster, and Fujisawa sees in Soichiro an inexhaustible source of innovation that differentiates Honda from any other emerging manufacturer. Little by little, the company acquires a more defined structure, technical and administrative departments, better organized production lines, sales teams that travel the country with catalogs and samples, and a network of associated workshops that know Honda mechanics and can offer proper maintenance. Within this structure, something begins to take shape that is not yet visible from the outside, but that will be key for the company's next leap. The search for a star product, a vehicle so well designed, so robust and so adapted to the needs of the public that it manages to place Honda on the map in an irreversible way. With Honda Motor already established, with a very singular leadership pair, and with the first models rolling through the streets of a Japan that is once again filling with movement, the general feeling is that the stage of survival has been overcome and that now a completely new phase begins, one in which the company aspires to change the way people move and to demonstrate that a dream born in a small workshop can expand far beyond what anyone would have imagined at the end of the war. And in that atmosphere of growth, the next step will be to find a vehicle capable of conquering not only those who need to move, but also the hearts of millions of users who, without knowing it, were waiting for exactly what Honda was about to offer them. The Super Cub and the Revolution. At the end of the 1950s, Honda Motor was no longer that small post-war adventure based on auxiliary bicycle engines and the first modest motorcycles. The organization was growing, the workshops were turning into increasingly structured factories, and the name Honda was beginning to be spoken with respect within Japan. However, for Soichiro Honda and Takeo Fujisawa, there was a clear feeling that something was still missing. A product capable of connecting with the general public in a much deeper way. Something so practical and well-designed that it would become part of the everyday landscape, almost an object of daily life, as natural as a bicycle, a watch, or a radio. That concern slowly incubated the idea that would end up giving shape to one of the most influential motorcycles in history, the Honda Super Cub. The starting point was a very simple observation. In Japanese society of those years, there were an enormous number of people who needed to move around but did not feel represented in the available motorcycles. Many models were heavy, difficult to handle, and conveyed an aggressive image that did not fit workers, housewives, students, or small merchants who were looking for a transportation tool, not a symbol of rebellion. Soichiro understood that if they managed to create a stable, light vehicle, clean in appearance and easy to use, they could reach a completely new clientele, people who had never considered riding a motorcycle because they associated it with dirt, danger, or mechanical complication. From that idea, a very clear concept began to take shape: a small motorcycle with a low step-through chassis that allowed getting on and off comfortably even while wearing traditional clothing, with an efficient and resistant engine, and with protection that prevented the user from ending up stained with oil or mud. In addition, it had to start without demanding too much physical effort, so that any adult with little experience could handle it from the first day. Soichiro, with his mechanical sensitivity, worked obsessively on the technical design. Fujisawa, with his commercial vision, insisted that the vehicle had to be sold in enormous quantities, which meant that production costs had to be perfectly controlled and reliability had to be almost absolute. From that combination emerged the Super Cub C100, a model with a 4-stroke low-displacement engine, silent, very frugal in fuel consumption, and surprisingly durable. The body design included a large front fairing that protected the rider's legs, a low frame structure that allowed it to be ridden almost like a bicycle, and a comfortable riding position designed for urban or semi-urban routes. It did not aspire to be a speed machine or a luxury object, but rather a daily companion for going to work, delivering goods, visiting clients, or simply moving around the city without ending up exhausted. The most interesting thing is that this motorcycle was born with a deeply inclusive philosophy. Honda wanted it to be used by men and women, young and older people, people with previous experience, and also those who had never been on a motorcycle. The semi-automatic shift lever made its handling much easier. The starting was simple, and maintenance was reduced to basic operations that any local workshop could carry out without complications. This design logic, conceived from the perspective of the real user and not from that of the engineer who seeks to show off, was one of the keys to the later success of the Super Cub. While the technical team refined details, Fujisawa thought about how to present it to the market. He knew that a new product of these characteristics needed more than a technical brochure. It required a story, a clear mental image in people's minds. He began imagining the small merchant who could deliver his products at greater speed, the office employee who would no longer depend on the overcrowded train, the teacher who could reach the school even on rainy days. That everyday vision translated into campaigns designed to show the Super Cub in normal situations, without exaggerations, integrated into daily life. The motorcycle was not presented as a whim or as an object to show off, but as a friendly, close, and useful tool. The launch was a breath of fresh air in the Japanese market. The rounded shape, the contained size, the discreet sound of the engine and the ease of use made people begin to see it with sympathy. At first, it was delivery workers, small businesses and self-employed workers who adopted the Super Cub as a practical solution to their mobility problems. Soon, students and employees arrived who found in it an economical and reliable way to reach their occupations. One of the curious details is that many people who would never have ridden a traditional motorcycle were encouraged by the Super Cub precisely because it did not impose, did not intimidate, and conveyed a feeling of approachable simplicity. The robustness of the design was confirmed over time. It was common for these motorcycles to travel thousands and thousands of kilometers with minimal maintenance, enduring rain, heat, bad roads, and daily intensive use. This generated very powerful word of mouth. When a product always returns to work after each day, it gains a reputation that no advertising campaign can match. In towns, cities, and secondary roads, the image of the Super Cub, with its characteristic seat and its low step-through structure, became something habitual, almost a symbol of a new stage for the country, more mobile and more dynamic. From a management perspective, the model allowed Honda something fundamental, stabilizing high production volumes with reasonable margins, which gave the company a solid economic base on which to continue innovating. Each unit sold was not only a motorcycle on the street, it was also another piece in the construction of a network of services, spare parts and workshops that consolidated the presence of the brand. The logic of scale was fulfilled. The more vehicles circulated, the more profitable the distribution and maintenance structure became, and that profitability could be reinvested in research and expansion. In cultural terms, the Super Cub transformed Japanese society's relationship with the motorcycle. It ceased to be seen as an object restricted to reckless youths or speed enthusiasts, and became part of the life of ordinary people who simply needed an efficient way to get around. This democratization had deep effects on Honda's image. It was no longer just another vehicle manufacturer. It was becoming a daily companion for millions of people, someone present on the route to work, on the trip to the market, or in visits to relatives who lived in other towns. With the passing of the years, the Super Cub far exceeded the category of a simple, successful product and became a long-lasting phenomenon. New versions, continuous improvements, adaptations to different markets, and usage conditions prolonged its commercial life until it became one of the best-selling motorcycles of all time. Each update respected the original essence: ease of use, reduced consumption, reliability, and a friendly aesthetic, recognizable at a glance. It was the tangible proof that good design centered on the real needs of people can have validity that crosses generations. For Honda, this model not only brought impressive sales figures, it also reinforced a key conviction. The future of the company depended on deeply understanding the lives of its users and daring to go against the stereotypes of its industry when necessary. The Super Cub had shown that it was possible to win by betting on well-resolved simplicity and daily utility, without the need to seek greatness through ostentation. With that foundation consolidated in its own country, with a motorcycle that was already a symbol of accessible mobility, and with a much more mature business structure, the question that began to appear in the conversations of the executive leadership was what horizons remained to be explored, and the gaze slowly began to turn to other markets, to distant customers who still did not know the name Honda, but who would soon see it written in shop windows and roads very different from those of Japan. Conquest of the United States market. When the Super Cub begins to multiply across the streets and roads of Japan, Honda reaches a level of stability and reputation that would have seemed impossible only a few years earlier, when Soichiro improvised engines on bicycles to help an exhausted country move again. However, both he and Fujisawa share the feeling that the true horizon still lies far ahead, and that limiting themselves to the domestic market would mean settling for an impact that, although meaningful, would not express the real magnitude of the company's potential. It is in this context that an idea emerges which at first seems more like an ambitious dream than a concrete business strategy: entering the United States, a vast, diverse, and competitive territory where automobile culture dominates in an almost symbolic way, and where motorcycles carry a meaning very different from the one they had in Japan. To understand the complexity of this challenge, it is necessary to remember how the image of the motorcycle was perceived in United States society during the 1950s. It was not associated with practical mobility or efficiency. It was strongly linked to loud, rebellious groups, to a tough aesthetic related to leather jackets and endless highways. Someone who rode a motorcycle was often seen as a person seeking speed, risk, or a countercultural identity, far from the broad profile of users that Honda had won over in Japan with the Super Cub. This cultural clash made a direct entry into the market, without a different approach, seemed destined to fail. Even so, both Soichiro and Fujisawa believed that there was room for something new, that there existed a public that did not yet feel represented, and that could be drawn to an alternative that was kinder, more accessible, and more efficient. From that intuition, the preparations began. Executives were sent to travel through cities, observe dealerships, analyze the competition, speak with small distributors, and study the way in which people in the United States related to transportation. The reports that returned to Japan were clear. The large manufacturers of the United States dominated the segment of powerful and heavy motorcycles, and the rest of the market was practically empty or unattended, especially among women, young people, urban workers, and families seeking economical options. This absence of alternatives opened a window for a lighter product, less intimidating and much easier to handle, something that, in spirit, recalled the Super Cub. Fujisawa understood that entering the United States required both product and narrative. It was not enough to send motorcycles and hope for sales. It was necessary to transform the way the public perceived the idea of riding a motorcycle. That analysis led to one of the boldest strategic decisions in the history of Honda, an advertising campaign completely different from anything previously seen in that market. While local, brands projected strength, aggressiveness, and speed, Honda wanted to communicate closeness, safety, and friendliness. The message needed to be so clear that anyone, even someone who had never considered riding a motorcycle, would feel that such a possibility was naturally beginning to open before them. Thus was born the campaign that would change the company's course abroad. You meet the nicest people on a Honda. Instead of showing rebels on deserted highways, the advertisements presented students, homemakers, young parents, smiling workers, and ordinary people moving around on Honda motorcycles as if they were merely an extension of their everyday routine. The images were filled with light, gentle colors, and an almost familiar tone that contrasted with the traditional values of the sector. It was a radical gamble, but also profoundly coherent with the essence that Honda had built, creating machines designed for real life, for those who seek efficiency and comfort before extreme speed. The impact was immediate and astonishing. Many people discovered that the idea of riding a motorcycle did not have to imply extreme adventure, unnecessary danger, or belonging to a specific group. It could simply be a practical, economical, and enjoyable tool for moving around the city or commuting to a university campus. Young people who needed an inexpensive way to get to class, women who sought a light and easy-to-control vehicle, urban workers who wanted to avoid traffic all found in Honda an option that matched their lifestyle. Sales began to grow rapidly, and as more motorcycles circulated through the streets, the brand's reputation strengthened. A key factor in this process was reliability. Honda motorcycles arrived at dealerships perfectly adjusted, consumed little fuel, started easily, and required very basic maintenance. Even users with no experience felt comfortable with them, and this generated a multiplying effect. Each satisfied person became a sort of involuntary ambassador who recommended the brand to friends, family, or co-workers. The combination of technical quality, friendly design, and innovative marketing allowed Honda to expand across the United States in an almost organic way, creating a solid foundation for the next phase of its growth. While the United States market reacted with enthusiasm, within the company there was a mixture of excitement and responsibility. For the first time, Honda confirmed that it could compete outside Japan and capture the attention of an audience that had not previously been drawn to lightweight motorcycles. This validation not only increased sales but also strengthened internal confidence, generating the sense that the entire world could be an accessible territory if the company understood the needs of each region and adapted intelligently. Fujisawa meticulously oversaw the commercial expansion, while Soichiro focused on ensuring that technical quality accompanied this growth without compromising the values that had made Honda different from the beginning. The triumphant arrival of Honda in the United States marked a structural shift for the company. It ceased to be a Japanese manufacturer with international aspirations and became a global enterprise with real presence beyond its borders. Moreover, that success fueled the ambition to explore new segments and technologies, aware that they already had experience transforming a market from within. The conquest of the United States demonstrated that Honda was capable of understanding different cultures, offering products suited to those realities, and building communication that emotionally connected with the final user. With a solid foundation in Japan and the United States, with sales growing on both sides of the ocean, and with a rising reputation, the company began to consider larger challenges that did not stop at convincing new users but aimed to measure its technical skill in environments where engineering is tested in extreme ways. That impulse toward challenge and the search for recognition would soon lead them to a terrain where engines roar at their limit, and where companies prove their excellence by competing against the best in the world. Honda enters the world of the engine. When Honda begins to consolidate its presence in Japan and the United States, the company experiences a moment of contained euphoria, a mixture of pride for everything it has achieved and a restlessness that pushes it toward new territories. For Soichiro Honda, commercial growth, no matter how important it was never enough to satisfy his competitive spirit. He did not see engineering merely as a tool to manufacture accessible and reliable vehicles. He understood it also as a language capable of expressing itself in its purest form on the terrain where machines are tested without indulgence. Motor competitions. Since his youth, since those improvised races in which he risked his life just to feel the roar of the engine, he had dreamed of taking his creations to the circuits where the technical greatness of a brand was defined. That impulse, deeply emotional and deeply technical at the same time, was beginning to take an increasingly strong place within the company. In the years following the success of the Super Cub, Honda possessed a growing manufacturing capacity, a team of engineers increasingly well prepared, and an internal culture that was beginning to accept innovation as a non-negotiable pillar. Even so, the idea of entering professional races generated doubts in some sectors of the company, especially among those who feared the financial cost and the reputational risk of a resounding failure. But Soichiro had a very different vision. He believed that if Honda wanted to be a truly respected brand in the world, it had to demonstrate on the track that it was capable of creating machines designed to perform at the limit. For him, competition was not a luxury, it was a natural evolution of knowledge. The factor that ultimately tipped the balance was the conviction, also shared by Fujisawa, that competing could become a living laboratory. The circuits were places where engines endured extreme stress, and where failures were not theoretical, but real, concrete, and visible. Each race could be transformed into an accelerated accumulation of technical experience. In a factory, a flaw could take months to show its consequences. On the track, a small error manifested in a matter of seconds, and that brutal immediacy allowed learning at an incomparable speed. The combination of risk and learning was perfect for a founder who had always believed that engineering had to be tested under real conditions. Thus, Honda decided to enter motorcycle competitions, beginning with local championships and then making the leap to international events. The company sent a small team of young engineers, many of them without previous racing experience, but with enormous passion and a discipline that was beginning to reflect the character of the company. The first results were modest, although promising, and each participation revealed design flaws, stability problems, unexpected friction, carburation errors, or losses of power under extreme conditions. Unlike other manufacturers who hid their weaknesses to protect their image, Honda embraced each defeat as an invaluable source of information. It was common to see Honda's engineers gathered in the garages after a race taking frantic notes, examining worn parts, discussing vibrations, and inspecting the engines with an obsessiveness that drew the attention even of their competitors. For Soichiro, the track was a field of study as important as any laboratory, and the company's attitude reflected that philosophy of constant improvement. Instead of lamenting poor results, the team returned to Japan, loaded with data and with renewed energy to modify, adjust, redesign, or even reinvent entire sections of the motorcycle. Over time, that method, learning at the limit, correcting, trying again, began to produce visible results. Honda engines became more efficient, suspensions more stable, aerodynamics more refined, and materials more resistant to extreme temperatures. Each improvement was the result of a series of small defeats transformed into opportunities for growth. The company no longer manufactured motorcycles solely for the general public. It was beginning to build machines designed to compete at the highest level, and that duality enriched both worlds. The innovations created for racing eventually found their way into street models, improving their performance and strengthening Honda's reputation as a manufacturer of advanced technology. The obsession with standing out in competition eventually led Honda to set a goal that many considered impossible: winning in Europe, the birthplace of professional motorcycling. Countries such as Italy, Germany, and Great Britain had dominated the sector for decades, with experienced teams, legendary riders, and highly advanced technologies. Entering that arena was almost an act of audacity, especially for a Japanese company so young in comparison. Despite external doubts, Soichiro never allowed himself to be intimidated by the prestige of his rivals. He saw in that challenge an opportunity to position Honda on a completely different level. The first trips to Europe were a mixture of amazement and humility. The circuits were more demanding, the competitors more aggressive, and the expectations of the public much higher. European teams looked with a certain disdain at the Japanese delegation that arrived with small motorcycles and an almost innocent appearance. But what they could not see was the determination hidden behind those seemingly modest engines. Honda was there to learn, not to impress, and that approach, although not glamorous at the beginning, ended up being decisive. The victories began to arrive after several seasons of continuous effort. Some were more symbolic, others more forceful, but all reinforced the idea that Honda had ceased to be merely a manufacturer of mobility solutions to become also a creator of machines designed to win. The company demonstrated that it could compete with the historical giants of motorcycling, and that technical achievement opened a new dimension in its corporate identity. The brand was beginning to consolidate itself as synonymous with reliability, innovation, and boldness, qualities that are not easily found together in such a young company. For Japan, Honda's successful presence in European competitions had a profound meaning. It was a time when the country still carried the weight of its recent past, and each international achievement contributed to rebuilding the self-esteem of a nation that wanted to show the world that it could be reborn with strength. Honda became, almost without intending to, a symbol of that rebirth. Its victories were not only sporting achievements, they represented the ability of a wounded country to rise with creativity, discipline, and ambition. Within the company, this stage strengthened a culture of permanent challenge. The engineers became accustomed to working under extreme pressure, to accepting criticism as a tool for progress, and to seeing every obstacle as another stage in the process. That mentality, which Soichiro had carried within him since his youth, permeated entire generations within Honda and became an essential characteristic of the company. With competition now integrated into the company's identity, and with an international reputation on the rise, Honda's gaze began to turn toward a new, unknown, and disproportionately ambitious terrain. Motorcycles had been a path toward excellence, but there remained a sector where engines reached their maximum expression, where the challenge was so great that only companies with true courage dared to enter. That growing restlessness would define the next stage of the story. The challenge of Formula One. When Honda had already proven in motorcycle racing that it could face the best teams in Europe and emerge victorious, the ambition of Soichiro began to look toward an even more demanding stage, a place where engines lived on the edge of destruction and where technical prestige was decided in fractions of a second: Formula One. For many inside the company, that idea sounded almost like madness, because it meant entering a territory dominated by European brands with decades of experience, consolidated teams, complex circuits, and enormous budgets. But for Soichiro, who had always interpreted engineering as a personal challenge, the highest category of motor racing was the ultimate test to show that Honda could stand at the level of any giant in the world. The context did not help much to soften the decision either. Japan was still in a process of industrial consolidation, and Honda, although expanding, was still seen by much of the world as a manufacturer of motorcycles and light vehicles, not as a company capable of building racing single-seaters with extremely high-performance engines. However, that external perception acted more like fuel than a brake for the founder. In his mind, the only way to change the image of the brand was to demonstrate, on the most demanding track on the planet, that a Honda engine could roar at the level of the best. It was not enough to say it. The name of the company had to appear in the classification tables of a championship where no one gave anything away. The Formula One project was planned with a particular characteristic that revealed the nature of Honda. The objective was to build a car almost entirely in-house, designing the chassis, the engine, and a large part of the critical components, instead of limiting themselves to manufacturing a power unit for another team to use. That decision increased the complexity of the challenge in a dramatic way, but it also offered the opportunity to learn in every plater area, from aerodynamics to tire behavior, including transmission systems, weight distribution, and vehicle dynamics. For Soichiro, the value of that comprehensive knowledge compensated the risk. The first Honda single-seaters, such as the RA271 and later the RA272, were born from a mixture of ingenuity and brilliance. They were different cars, with technical solutions that surprised their rivals, and with engines that, although still needing to mature, already made it clear that the Japanese company understood what it meant to extract power at a high regime for long periods of time. The engineers worked almost without rest, adapting concepts from motorcycles and experimenting with new configurations, while the drivers faced unknown circuits, historic tracks in Europe and America, where the margin for error was minimal and where any off-track excursion could end in tragedy. The first results were modest, with frequent retirements, reliability problems, setup errors, and evident differences compared to teams with much more experience. However, every race offered valuable information. The technical team once again demonstrated the same working style it had shown in motorcycle racing. After every Grand Prix, the nights were filled with meetings, data analysis, parts disassembled on improvised tables, and discussions about how to extract a little more power, how to improve cooling, how to reduce weight without sacrificing strength. For Honda, Formula One was a huge mobile laboratory that traveled from country to country, forcing the company to think faster and more precisely. The effort began to pay off in the year 1965, when a moment arrived that would go down in the history of Honda and Japanese motorsport. In the Mexican Grand Prix, at the end of the season, the RA272 finally showed all the accumulated potential. With a 12-cylinder engine in a V configuration that reached extremely high revolutions and a much more refined chassis, the single-seater managed to prevail against highly renowned rivals. That victory was much more than a checkered flag. It represented the confirmation that a Japanese company, which only a few decades earlier had been the small workshop of a young dreamer, could conquer the highest step of a competition dominated by Europeans. In Japan, the news was experienced as a symbol of national pride, and inside the company it was interpreted as the direct result of years of almost obsessive effort. However, the history of Honda in Formula One would not be an ascending line without shadows. At the end of the 1960s, in the midst of the development of new prototypes, the decision was made to put on track an experimental single-seater that was extremely light and powerful, with a configuration that sought to push the relationship between power and weight to the limit. That car, the RA302, became the protagonist of one of the most painful episodes for the brand. During the French Grand Prix of the year 1968, at the Rouen circuit, the driver Joe Schlesser suffered a terrible accident at the wheel of this model, which burst into flames after going off the track, causing his death. The tragedy struck Honda deeply, and especially Soichiro, who felt morally responsible for having allowed such an extreme prototype to be tested in real race conditions. This accident was an emotional and strategic turning point. The company had to reflect deeply on the acceptable limits of risk in the search for performance. Formula One, which, until then, had been a stage of learning and glory, suddenly became a brutal reminder that technical passion could not be disconnected from the responsibility for the lives of those who drove the cars. As a result of that introspection, Honda decided to withdraw from the category as a constructor, closing a chapter that mixed historic triumphs with a pain that weighed too heavily. That withdrawal did not mean a definitive abandonment of motor racing, but it did create a pause that allowed the company to redirect its energy toward different projects. Years later, Honda would return to Formula One as an engine supplier for other teams, once again achieving victories and championships, but that is another stage of the story. What matters in this first cycle is what it left in the DNA of the company. A culture of technical excellence, a deep understanding of mechanical limits, and a sharp awareness that technology, no matter how advanced, must always rest on a clear, ethical foundation. From an entrepreneurial point of view, Honda's time in Formula One during the 1960s illustrates something fundamental. Business greatness is not measured only in positive balances or well-sold products, but also in the ability to face the toughest challenges, learn from them, assume the consequences, and adjust the course when necessary. Soichiro achieved what he had dreamed of as a young man, seeing his machines compete at the summit of motor racing. But he also had to accept that even the noblest drive may be forced to slow down when circumstances reveal a cost that is too high. At the same time, all that experience accumulated in high-speed circuits, in engines pushed to their limit, and in chassis subjected to extreme forces, was not lost in the void. The engineers who worked on those single-seaters carried with them knowledge that eventually filtered into other projects within the company, especially in the development of vehicles for everyday use. Having built machines capable of withstanding the brutal pressure of Formula One gave them a different perspective on what could be achieved in a car designed for common roads, and that vision would become decisive when Honda began to truly look toward the world of road automobiles as a central part of its future. The first Honda automobiles. When Honda decides to look seriously at the world of the automobile, the company is no longer that small factory born in the post-war period among motorized bicycles and recycled engines. It is a company that has learned to compete on circuits, to conquer distant markets, and to design products conceived with extreme care for the final user. Even so, taking the leap from the universe of motorcycles to that of automobiles is not a simple lateral movement. It is a change in scale, in technical complexity, and in responsibilities that few dare to undertake. In Japan, established manufacturers already exist, heavy industrial structures are in place, political relationships are consolidated, and there is a certain sense that the space for new actors is limited. In that context, the idea that Honda would venture to produce automobiles seems, for many, a gesture of perhaps excessive boldness. Soichiro Honda, however, had been maturing that idea for a long time. The accumulated experience in small, highly efficient, high-revving engines, the deep understanding of mechanics, and the extreme learning gained from competition build in his mind the conviction that the company is ready for something bigger. He imagines light vehicles, joyful to drive, with compact and very flexible engines that break away from the feeling of heaviness that many cars of the time still carry. At the same time, he is aware that the automobile is destined to become an increasingly central element in the daily life of families, and that, if Honda wants to continue growing, it must participate in that transformation of mobility. The path toward the first production automobile begins with many internal debates. There are reservations, especially because of the enormous cost of developing new platforms, building factories dedicated to automobile assembly, and meeting specific regulations. Creating a motorcycle is complex, but an automobile multiplies many times the number of components, systems, and necessary tests. Takeo Fujisawa, always careful with numbers, analyzes again and again the possible scenarios, calculates risks, and demands realistic forecasts from the engineers. During that time, Soichiro pushes from the technical side, convinced that the company is mature enough for such a challenge. From that tense but complementary dialogue between vision and prudence, the decision to fully enter the sector will be born. Before launching a car for the general public, Honda begins with a type of vehicle that is simpler and directly connected with the base of the Japanese economy of the time, a small light truck. In 1963, the Honda T360 appears, a mini truck of compact dimensions that fits the regulations for light vehicles and is designed for small merchants, farmers, and workers who need to transport goods over short and medium distances. Its small engine, inspired by the high revolutions philosophy inherited from motorcycles, offers a surprisingly strong power delivery for its displacement. The T360 demonstrates that Honda knows how to adapt its mechanical experience to the requirements of a four-wheel chassis, and that it can build a practical, resistant, and economical vehicle. This first automotive model has a special meaning because it connects with the essence of the brand, helping people work, move, start small businesses, and sustain their daily life. It is not a luxury car or an object of prestige, it is an efficient work tool. Thanks to it, Honda tests its automobile production processes, refines methods, establishes supply chains, and learns to integrate bodywork, chassis, and propulsion within a larger industrial structure. All that experience will be crucial when it decides to take the definitive step toward a vehicle intended more for the pleasure of driving than for cargo transport. That step materializes in the same year with the Honda S500, a small, convertible sports car that breaks any expectation of those who saw the company only as a manufacturer of utility vehicles and motorcycles. The S500, derived from the S360 prototype shown earlier, incorporates a four-cylinder engine with dual overhead camshafts that revs to very high ranges, recalling the spirited character of the brand's motorcycles. Its contained size, its lightness, and its relaxed style convey a sensation of agility different from that of other sports cars of the time. It is not intended to compete with the great European Grand Tourers. Its mission is to offer driving pleasure and to demonstrate Honda's technical capability in the automotive field. In that small sports car, an important part of Soichiro's philosophy is condensed. He has always believed that a vehicle should have a certain playful spirit, that it should invite the person who drives it to enjoy the act of moving, to feel a direct connection with the engine and with the road. The S500 represents that ideal on an accessible scale, without excess, but with a clearly distinctive character. Its engine, capable of reaching revolutions that were surprising at the time for a car of its size, allows Honda to show the world that its experience in competition engines and motorcycles can also be translated to the asphalt of civil use. Internally, the simultaneous launch of the T360 and the S500 serves to consolidate a clear message. Honda has officially entered the automobile sector, and it has done so by showing two complementary sides of its personality. On one hand, the pragmatic utility of a mini-truck that helps move goods and supports the productive base of the country. On the other, the passionate side of a lightweight sports car that highlights the enjoyment behind the wheel. This duality anticipates the way the company will develop in the future, always moving between functionality and pleasure, between efficiency and emotion. The construction of the Suzuka plant becomes a symbol of this new stage. There, specific production lines for automobiles are optimized, and techniques the company has learned in motorcycles and in its time on the circuits are integrated. Attention to quality becomes obsessive, welds are inspected, body panel alignment is controlled, engines are tested repeatedly, and inspection systems aimed at minimizing any defect are implemented. Honda understands that entering the world of automobiles demands an even stricter commitment to reliability, since the lives of entire families may depend on the correct response of a braking system, on stability in a curve, or on the robustness of the chassis. As these first automobiles begin to circulate on Japanese roads, public perception slowly changes. Honda is no longer only the brand of agile motorcycles or small work machines. It becomes an actor capable of offering transportation solutions on four wheels with a distinctive touch. Users highlight the sensation of lightness, the lively character of the engines, and a driving experience that is different, closer to the spirit of motorcycles than to the heavy cars that still dominate many segments. However, Honda knows that these first models are only the beginning of a much longer path. The market is transforming, cities are growing, work distances are expanding, and automobiles are beginning to occupy a central place in the aspirations of many families. New concerns arise, such as fuel consumption, the impact of emissions, and the need for versatile vehicles that can serve both daily work and leisure. In that emerging scenario, the company begins to ask itself how to design cars that respond to those challenges while maintaining its technical identity but adapting to new social and regulatory sensitivities. From the perspective of entrepreneurship, this phase of the first automobiles shows something essential: the value of starting with well-defined products, of learning in specific niches, and of growing from there toward more ambitious proposals. Honda does not immediately jump to compete with large luxury sedans or with high-displacement cars. It chooses the path of specialization in light, efficient, and technically sophisticated vehicles. And from that ground it builds knowledge that will later allow it to tackle more complex projects. That strategy, patient and at the same time bold, will be key when the company sets out to create models that will mark an era in the history of the automobile. The impact of the Civic and the Accord. When Honda had already taken its first steps in the world of automobiles with light vehicles and compact sports models, the global landscape began to change in a way that would test the creativity of every manufacturer. In the early years of the decade of the 1970s, governments began to pay much more attention to engine pollution. Increasingly strict emissions regulations appeared, and shortly after, the oil crisis completely altered the fuel economy, making it more expensive and forcing millions of drivers to reconsider what kind of car made sense to keep. The automobile stopped being only a symbol of progress and became as well a source of environmental and economic concern. In that tense context, full of doubts and adjustments, Honda began to build two models that would be fundamental not only for its history, but also for the way the world would view the compact car in the decades that followed: the Civic and the Accord. The effort began with a very concrete problem. In the United States, regulations were coming into force that required a drastic reduction in polluting emissions, and many manufacturers focused on solutions that imposed complex and heavy systems, often based on early catalytic devices and adjustments that reduced power and refinement in engines that already came from an outdated architecture. Honda decided to attack the challenge from a different angle. Instead of resigning itself to losing efficiency in order to meet the laws, it set out to develop a technology that would allow cleaner combustion and, at the same time, maintain low consumption and reasonable performance. In that way, the CVCC engine was born, a stratified combustion system that optimized the air-fuel mixture and allowed compliance with regulations without resorting to solutions that were too costly or too aggressive toward the driving experience. This technical breakthrough found its ideal vehicle in the Civic, presented, in the early years of the decade of the 1970s, as a compact, lightweight automobile with simple lines, created for the real life of ordinary people. The car, with its contained size, maximized interior space, and extremely efficient engine, arrived on the market just as many drivers were beginning to realize that maintaining large gasoline-hungry cars was becoming less and less viable. The Civic offered something that seemed almost contradictory: an economical vehicle that did not feel impoverished, a small car with character, agile in the city, capable on the highway, and very sparing in fuel consumption. The CVCC engine also became a powerful selling point, especially in the United States. While some manufacturers struggled to adapt old mechanical structures to the new regulations, Honda presented a car that fulfilled the rules without needing a complex catalytic system, demonstrating a capacity for innovation that surprised the engineers of the time. Suddenly, the brand's image became associated with intelligent engineering, with elegant solutions to difficult problems. At a time when many people saw environmental regulations as an obstacle, Honda managed to turn them into an opportunity for differentiation. But the Civic did not stand out only because of its engine. It also offered a user experience that matched what many people were beginning to need. It was easy to park, maneuverable, with good visibility, a surprisingly spacious interior for its size, and a reasonable, non-excessive level of equipment. For people living in congested cities or needing a second family vehicle, the Civic was a logical option. Reliability tests began to build a solid reputation. It started in cold conditions, consumed little fuel, rarely failed, and endured the intensive demands of daily use. That consistency in performance became a kind of common thread among users who recommended the car without needing long speeches. As the Civic established itself as a reference compact, within Honda another gap began to appear. There was a segment of drivers looking for something slightly larger and more comfortable, with more interior space, a higher level of refinement, and a clear focus on family trips and long-distance travel. These people wanted efficiency and reliability, but they also valued a sense of comfort closer to that of traditional larger cars. The answer to that profile took shape in the year 1976 with the launch of the Honda Accord. The Accord was born first as a compact model with a simple appearance, but with careful attention to detail. Its four-cylinder engine, very finely tuned, offered a balanced combination of power and contained consumption. The bodywork, initially in a hatchback style and later in a sedan version, maintained a discreet silhouette without extravagance, but with pleasant proportions and an interior where every centimeter was used intelligently. The car conveyed a feeling of quiet quality, a sort of well-crafted character that could be appreciated in the touch of the controls, the fit of the doors, the smoothness of the gear changes, and the absence of unwanted noises. In markets such as the United States, the Accord became a true alternative to traditional sedans that consumed large amounts of fuel. Many families that previously would have chosen national brands automatically began to look at Honda with growing respect, discovering that this new automobile offered reliability, good performance, and fewer visits to the fuel station. Comparisons highlighted it as a balanced car, pleasant to drive, with a very contained cost of ownership. Over time, the Accord climbed in the rankings until becoming one of the best-selling models in its category year after year. The combined impact of the Civic and the Accord changed the global perception of Honda and, in a certain sense, helped transform the image of Japanese products in general. In previous decades, many consumers saw products made in Japan as something cheap and short-lived. With these models, that idea began to crumble. Japanese cars became associated with reliability, efficiency, good finishes, and meticulous attention to the real needs of the user. Honda, along with other manufacturers of the country, actively participated in rewriting the industrial reputation of Japan. Internally, the success of these automobiles allowed Honda to consolidate a very solid financial base. Sales grew, international presence expanded, and the company began to invest in new production facilities outside Japan, getting closer to the markets where it sold the most units. This strategy of manufacturing near the customer not only reduced logistical costs, it also conveyed a message of commitment to the countries in which it operated. In the United States, for example, the opening of assembly plants further strengthened Honda's bond with the local consumer, who no longer saw the brand only as an importer but as an active participant in the nation's economy. The technical learnings accumulated with the Civic and the Accord also had a chain effect on the development of future models. The company internalized the idea that a good car arises from the balance between efficient engineering, understanding of the social context, and a strong discipline of quality. The design and engineering teams developed increasingly sophisticated methods of testing, simulation, and evaluation, refining low-displacement engines, improving aerodynamics, reducing weight, and enhancing safety. That virtuous cycle allowed Honda to be prepared to respond to the next waves of regulatory changes and user expectations. From the perspective of entrepreneurship, this stage shows how a company can turn external crises into a lever for growth. Environmental restrictions and the oil crisis, which for many manufacturers were a threat, became for Honda the perfect context to display its technical creativity and its philosophy of efficiency. The Civic and the Accord were born from a lucid reading of the environment and from the courage to bet on compact cars at a time when the imagination of greatness was still strongly associated with size and raw power. With these two models traveling on roads all over the world, with millions of drivers experiencing a new way of understanding the automobile, Honda entered a stage in which the goal was no longer only to build engines or chassis, but to explore how far it could go by applying its culture of innovation to other areas of movement and technology, something that would open the door to increasingly varied and ambitious projects. Innovation without pause. After the international success of the Civic and the Accord, Honda enters an expansive phase that carries a different flavor from earlier stages. It is no longer about proving that it can build reliable motorcycles, nor about convincing the world that a compact automobile can compete with the great names. Now the company begins to explore an entire universe of technological possibilities that arise from its own restlessness, from that persistent spirit that has accompanied Honda since the times when Soichiro repaired bicycles in his father's workshop. It is a stage in which the company no longer limits itself to reacting to market changes, but instead begins to anticipate them, imagining products that the public does not yet know it will need, and perfecting technical solutions that will expand its reach across different fields of mobility. One of the first areas where this philosophy becomes evident is in the world of motorcycles, which continues to be a fundamental piece of the company's identity. Although Honda had already become a global leader in motorcycle sales, the leadership understood that maintaining that position depended on constant renewal and on the ability to design models adapted to a multitude of profiles and needs. Throughout this stage, the company develops motorcycles of all sizes and styles, small and economical for urban use, sporty models created for those seeking intense emotions, off-road models capable of facing difficult terrain, and grand touring motorcycles designed to travel long distances with comfort. Each segment represents an opportunity to apply new ideas in engines, suspensions, ergonomics, and safety systems. In parallel, Honda works to integrate technologies that enhance the riding experience. Softer starting systems, chassis designs that reduce vibrations, improvements in thermal efficiency, and adaptations that make maintenance easier even for those without advanced mechanical knowledge. The company also develops motorcycles with greater engine displacement, such as the legendary Goldwing, a model that redefines what it means to travel on two wheels, becoming synonymous with extreme comfort, durability, and stability. This type of vehicle shows that Honda is capable of designing complex machines that require a delicate balance between power, weight, and ergonomics, a skill that would later extend to increasingly ambitious projects. While the motorcycle division continues to innovate, the automotive branch experiences parallel growth. The Civic and the Accord are only the beginning of a broader offensive in which Honda dives into the development of more efficient engines, advanced transmissions, aerodynamic bodywork, and specialized vehicles. During this era, another characteristic emerges that will become a hallmark of the brand: the ability to build small engines with extraordinary performance. The engineers become obsessed with extracting more power from less displacement, with improving airflow, with reducing internal friction, and with creating increasingly refined combustion systems. It will not be long before one of Honda's most emblematic technical innovations arrives: the variable valve timing and lift mechanism known as the VTEC technology, a system that allows efficiency and power to coexist within the same engine. Although its impact will be more evident in later decades, its conceptual origin takes shape during this phase, when the company begins experimenting with ways to expand the useful range of gasoline engines without sacrificing fuel consumption or emissions. This capacity for fine engineering, which blends mechanical precision with creativity, shows that Honda is not interested in gigantic or showy solutions, but in intelligent ideas that solve problems in an elegant manner. Honda's diversification goes beyond motorcycles and automobiles. During these years, the company also explores the world of marine engines. It develops propulsion systems for small boats that stand out for their reliability and efficiency. two characteristics that quickly position them as an attractive option for fishers, tour operators, and navigation enthusiasts in different parts of the world. The logic behind these engines is similar to that of the rest of the company: to offer a robust product, easy to maintain, and adapted to demanding contexts such as saline environments or long trips without access to specialized workshops. Another field where the company begins to take its first steps is robotics and automation. Although the development of advanced humanoid robots is still far in the future, Honda's first experiments with automated systems and articulated mechanisms emerge during this stage. The interest in robotics arises from a question that will become stronger with time. How can a company that understands movement and mechanics transfer that knowledge to the design of machines capable of helping people in their daily lives? It is an approach that fits perfectly with Soichiro's philosophy, who always saw in mobility problems an opportunity to improve people's lives. In parallel, Honda also begins to explore the field of light aircraft. This interest, which at that time seemed like a distant dream, arises from technical curiosity and from the need to apply their ability to create increasingly efficient engines in environments where weight and power gain critical relevance. Although the Honda Jet will take decades to materialize, the seed is planted in this period, when some engineers begin to think about how they could transfer ideas of efficiency and performance to a small aircraft designed for corporate use. The fact that the company even contemplates this type of project shows the magnitude of the ambition being cultivated. An important dimension of this stage is internal culture. The obsession with improvement, present since the earliest years, becomes formalized and transforms into an integral part of work processes. The engineers are encouraged to make mistakes early and inexpensively, to question assumptions and to search for original solutions even for problems that appear small. Soichiro, although gradually leaving the day-to-day direction of the company, continues visiting factories, delivering motivational speeches, and reminding everyone that innovation is not a destination but a daily practice. That climate of creative freedom, combined with relentless technical discipline, allows Honda to maintain a development pace that is difficult to match. During this phase, the company's vision of social responsibility also strengthens. Honda begins to participate in projects aimed at reducing emissions, optimizing fuel consumption, and minimizing the environmental impact of its production processes. The company understands that it cannot grow indefinitely without paying attention to the world around it, and begins to integrate cleaner energies and recycling processes into its industrial chain. These initiatives, although still emerging, anticipate an ecological awareness that will become more central in the future. At the business level, this stage clearly shows how a company can expand without losing its essence, as long as it maintains its technical identity as a compass and its deep understanding of the user as a guide. Honda diversifies its products, expands globally, and experiments in new fields without making the mistake of scattering its focus, because each project, no matter how different, arises from the same roots: movement, efficiency, reliability, and long-term vision. The sustainable growth of this era prepares the ground for more complex challenges, changing markets, crises that force strategies to be revised, and decisions that demand the courage to correct course when things do not progress as expected. On that inevitable road toward the unforeseen, Honda will have to learn to manage problems that will test its maturity as a global manufacturer. Crisis, withdrawal, and reinvention. At the end of the decade of the 1980s and throughout much of the 1990s, Honda goes through a period in which its industrial maturity faces for the first time problems that are not solved solely with brilliant engineering or innovative products. The company, which had grown at an impressive speed during the previous decades, finds itself in a more complex global context, with saturated markets, economic fluctuations that shake sales, and fierce competition that has learned many of the strategies that previously differentiated Honda from the rest. It is a stage in which the brand's deep convictions are put to the test, and in which the company has to ask itself what it means to continue growing without losing sight of what has made it unique since its early days. One of the first challenges of this phase arrives in the form of internal tension. Soichiro Honda, founder and spiritual engine of the company, officially withdraws from executive leadership in 1973, although he continues to be involved as an advisor and inspiring figure. His presence still influences the creative environment, but decisions no longer go directly through him. During this time, the company must learn to operate without the charismatic and disruptive figure who had driven its first decades. The transition from a company led by a visionary to an organization managed by executive teams is a delicate process, and Honda, like many family businesses that become professionalized, begins to feel the friction between tradition and modernity. At the same time, the global economic landscape changes with disconcerting speed. The financial bubble in Japan, which during the 1980s had inflated the country's economy to artificial levels, bursts at the beginning of the 1990s and drags many industries with it. Although Honda has a global presence, its internal structure still depends greatly on the paying economic health of Japan, and the bursting of the bubble affects consumer confidence, reduces internal investment, and makes domestic markets much more cautious. The company, accustomed to sustained growth, begins to feel the pressure to optimize resources, revise strategies, and adjust budgets with greater severity. This period is marked by a phenomenon that also affects other Japanese manufacturers: market saturation. In previous decades, demand for automobiles had grown without pause, driven by the expansion of cities and the increase in the standard of living. But starting in the 1990s, many families already have one or two vehicles, and growth begins to depend more on the ability to replace existing models than on selling to new buyers. This forces Honda to compete much more aggressively in innovation, design, and price, something that, although not new to the company, does reach a level of intensity that it had not experienced for such a prolonged period. In this complex context, another pressure factor appears: the increase in production costs. As automotive technology becomes more sophisticated, components grow more complex and safety standards rise. Production, materials, electronic systems, and logistical processes require continuous investment. Although Honda has always been very competitive thanks to its efficient engineering, the company feels that the margin between innovation and profitability becomes increasingly narrow. This obliges it to rethink part of its global structure, to open more plants abroad, and to seek strategic alliances that allow cost sharing, something it had historically tried to avoid in order to maintain technical independence. In parallel, Japanese corporate culture begins to change. For decades, the figure of the loyal worker who spends his entire life in the same company had been a social pillar. However, new generations begin to seek more flexible and horizontal opportunities. Honda, which had always promoted a creative spirit and a relatively open environment compared to other traditional Japanese companies, faces the task of adapting its internal culture to a context in which talent retention no longer depends solely on the prestige of the brand or the stability of employment. On the technical level, the company also takes on important challenges: the development of new combustion technologies, the arrival of increasingly restrictive emission regulations, and the growing interest in hybrid and electric systems force Honda to invest in research areas that are very costly and of uncertain return. This technological transition is especially delicate because Honda's identity is deeply linked to its internal combustion engines, famous for their reliability, efficiency, and characteristic sound. Accepting that the world is heading toward forms of mobility that could displace these engines is an emotional blow for the company, but also a call to reinvention. During these decades, difficult, strategic decisions are also made. Honda experiments with products that do not meet expectations, such as vehicles too advanced for their time or proposals that do not connect with the general public. The brand had always had the habit of taking risks, but in times of uncertainty, those risks can become especially costly. This situation generates intense debates within management about what should be the future course of the company. To bet on revolutionary technologies, or to refine even more the formula that had worked so well for them. In the midst of this turbulent scenario, the company achieves an important milestone that symbolizes its spirit of perseverance: the return to Formula One as an engine supplier during the decade of the 1980s and later in the 1990s. Although this stage is not free of difficulties, it serves as a reminder of Honda's permanent commitment to high-performance engineering and demonstrates that the company is still capable of standing out in extremely demanding environments. But even these moments of sporting glory coexist with the feeling that the company needs a clearer direction to sustain long-term growth. Despite the tensions, doubts, and structural challenges, Honda never loses its ability to adapt. In this stage, the company strengthens its global presence, expands its industrial network in Asia, America, and Europe, and prepares to explore technologies that until that moment had seemed distant. The company begins to understand that the future will not be a simple extension of the past, and that 21st century mobility will require cleaner, smarter, and more interconnected solutions. With these transformations underway, Honda heads toward a period that will mark a before and after, a stage in which technological innovation will cease to be a complement and will become the very heart of the corporate project. The company prepares to enter a terrain where engines share protagonism with processors, sensors, and intelligent systems, a world where robotics, light aviation, and alternative technologies begin to take real shape inside its laboratories. Walking toward that horizon, Honda approaches a phase of rebirth that will give meaning to all the experience accumulated in previous decades. A living legacy and a future in motion. As the end of the 20th century approaches and the 21st century begins to take shape, Honda enters a stage of profound transformation, marked by a blend of introspection, technological courage, and an unrelenting will to keep moving forward, even when the industrial horizon becomes more complex and the mobility of the entire world begins to redefine itself. The company, mature and global, no longer lives in the chaotic effervescence of its early years, but it still preserves an impulse that pushes it to look beyond the immediate, attempting to understand what it will mean to move in a world where old certainties stop working and new demands multiply. One of the areas where this transition becomes especially visible is hybrid technology. With the announcement of the Honda Insight in 1999, the company marks its official entry into a territory destined to become a central pillar of contemporary mobility. The Insight, with its aerodynamic design, lightweight structure, and combination of gasoline engine and electric motor, appears at a time when environmental concerns begin to occupy the center of public debate. Efficiency becomes a social value, and Honda, thanks to its previous experience in extremely optimized combustion engines, has a solid foundation to face the challenge of merging two technologies that require delicate coordination between software, electronics, and precision mechanics. Although the initial Insight is a niche vehicle, its presence sends an important message. Honda understands that the future will be hybrid for a long time, and it is willing to lead the adaptation process. This step opens the door to a family of hybrid models that will appear in the following years, including versions of the Civic and the Accord, as well as developments in powertrains that combine environmental sensitivity with sufficient performance to convince those who still doubted the new technology. At the same time, the company maintains its commitment to mobility on 4 and 2 wheels, without losing sight of social changes. Cities grow denser, commutes shorten, and urban transportation needs take on new forms. Honda responds by expanding its range of urban motorcycles, electric scooters, and models designed for agile riding in congested environments. Engineers work on more efficient batteries, quiet electric motors, and systems that facilitate charging and maintenance. It is not simply about electrifying to follow a trend, but about seeking solutions that maintain the practicality that has always characterized the brand. Beyond 4 and 2 wheels, Honda continues developing the Honda Jet, a project that had quietly begun decades earlier and that finally takes shape as a light aircraft intended for executive transport. Its design incorporates innovations such as placing the engines above the wings, an uncommon but extremely efficient configuration that reduces vibrations, improves aerodynamics, and optimizes consumption. The Honda Jet represents a new territory where the company blends aeronautical engineering with its traditional obsession for efficiency and performance. Although it is a product aimed at a segment far removed from the automotive market, it reaffirms Honda's technological versatility and its willingness to explore areas that initially seemed distant from its main business. In parallel, the company deepens its research in robotics. The dream that began with sketches of articulated mechanisms and preliminary experiments materializes in Asimo, a humanoid robot designed to walk, maintain balance, recognize gestures, and perform basic support tasks. Asimo is not a commercial product, but it becomes a global symbol of Honda's ability to work on technologies that require a complex understanding of movement, dynamic stability, and interaction with human beings. Although it is not intended to replace people, it represents an advance that brings assistive robotics closer to the daily life of institutions, hospitals, and research centers. At a corporate level, Asimo demonstrates that Honda does not consider mobility solely as human transportation, but also as the movement of machines that can assist, accompany, and complement people's lives. Another dimension of this stage is the deepening of hydrogen technologies. The Honda FCX Clarity is one of the first hydrogen vehicles produced in limited series, a forward-looking gamble that explores an alternative route to conventional electrification. This move responds to the desire to understand different paths toward cleaner mobility, without being tied to a single solution. Although hydrogen faces infrastructure and cost challenges, Honda develops this line with patience and technical rigor, convinced that energy diversification is essential to meet the environmental challenges of the future. In the world of high-performance motorsports, Honda once again encounters familiar stages. It returns to Formula One at various moments, both as an engine manufacturer and through strategic alliances with renowned teams. Some seasons are brilliant, others complicated, but the goal remains the same: to use competition as a laboratory of innovation and as a reminder of the technical passion that has always driven the company. Although Formula One is no longer the heroic terrain of the first victory in Mexico, it remains a space where the company tests its ability to adapt, improves its hybrid systems, and learns about energy management under extreme conditions. On a human level, Honda honors the memory of its founder when, in 1991, Soichiro Honda passes away, leaving behind a vast legacy that transformed the mobility of the planet. The company, however, does not turn his figure into a rigid symbol. It prefers to remember him as an active spirit, a philosophy in motion that remains present in every technical decision and every new project. Internal speeches evoke his insistence on always improving, his persistent inconformity, and his conviction that technology must serve daily life. As the company advances into the present, its challenges take on a different shape. The transition toward electric vehicles becomes more intense. Cities demand shared mobility solutions, environmental regulations grow stricter, and global competition includes both historic manufacturers and new technological companies born directly in the digital age. Honda faces this landscape by relying on its roots, but also by forging alliances, exploring new business models, and restructuring its production to adapt to a world where mobility is not an object but a continuous service. What is most interesting is that, in this contemporary stage, Honda achieves something very few companies manage, maintaining a balance between evolution and essence. It embraces electrification without abandoning research into alternative fuels, continues manufacturing motorcycles, while developing robots and airplanes, and works on mobility software without losing its mechanical obsession for efficiency. This balance is part of what keeps its legacy alive. Honda is not a company that avoids change, but neither is it one that gets lost in passing trends. It seeks paths that make sense in the long term. Honda's legacy is not summed up by its products, but by the attitude that has fueled every stage of its history. From the motorized bicycles of the post-war period to the hybrid vehicles of the 21st century, from the small sports cars to the walking robots, the company maintains a deep relationship with the idea of movement, understood as the ability to advance even in uncertain contexts. It is a company that has grown by confronting crises, learning from competition, and assuming risks that may have seemed excessive, but that have always responded to a firm conviction that innovating is a responsibility and not a luxury. And although the journey continues, what becomes clear when reviewing its history is that Honda is not defined by a specific moment, but by the sum of all these chapters, each built from passion, ingenuity, and a tenacious faith in the possibility of improving the world one machine at a time. Thank you for joining me on this journey through the history of Honda. I hope it helped you relax while discovering how great ideas are born. I will love reading you in the comments to know which part surprised you the most and which company you would like to hear about in the next video. If you enjoy this kind of content, subscribe so you do not miss the next documentaries. Rest, disconnect, and let sleep find you. Good night.